want to talk a little bit about the tourism issue in Japan. And I hear the word over-tourism quite a lot. And I don't think it's really over-tourism. I think it's more tourism fatigue. And that's just fatigue is what happens when you're tired, right? And what I think is kind of funny is that the Japanese government is actually trying to increase the number of tourists. They've got a couple different things going on, like they're saying, should we charge tourists more? And that's something that I saw from, say, what do we call them now? Developing countries. If you go in and you're obviously a tourist, they would sometimes give you a different menu. But if you went in with a local, you would get charged a different price. So that is kind of a developing nation type of issue, and I don't think Japan wants to go that route. What do you think? Now, when I first came back to Japan in 2014, for this time, there were these tax-free signs all over Japan. If you make big purchases, if you buy a camera, you make a big purchase, you can go to a little booth in the building where you're shopping, and you can either, at the point of purchase, you would either not get charged tax, but you could go get your tax refunded, 10% I think it is. So you make a $1,000 purchase and you get 10% back. That's pretty dang good, right? I think that's probably the thing that's my suggestion for Japan. And I'm not in a position to suggest things for Japan, but that's what I would suggest if I were able to make those suggestions. So what is causing this, tourism fatigue? I think, Japan has actually experienced a boom in tourism since the lockdown was lifted, and I've seen a lot of statistics, and maybe you'll have better statistics than me, so please, tell me in the comments below, but some people are saying that there's more tourism in Japan than ever. I don't think that's exactly accurate, but what we really notice, since people notice changes, right? People notice changes in temperature, people notice changes in, a lot of things. People have noticed a change because obviously after the lockdown, the floodgates opened, a lot of people came in. So I think that is why we get the perception that there's more tourism in Japan than ever. Actually, the numbers are about the same as pre-lockdown. It just seems like there's a lot more because for 2 or 3 years, the airports were running on a skeleton crew. There were hardly anybody coming to Japan. And either you couldn't travel or didn't want to travel. And so there were no tourists for a long time. And I think that's why there's a perception. Also, the weak yen, it made it so pretty much anybody can come. Not everybody can afford to, take time off and come to a foreign country. Airplane tickets are expensive on their own. Then you get to hotels. I've had family come here and I say, I'd offer you a place, but my place is hardly big enough for me. So, and they understand. But that means that if I had a 4 or 5 bedroom house, I'd probably have more visitors than I have now. And for my family, that's pretty normal. When you go visit somebody, they just expect you're going to stay with us because we're going to be taking you around. And we have the car. The host has the car. They want to cook for you. They want to sit around and visit as well. But when my friends and family come visit me in Japan, they got to get a hotel. So the weekend has made it possible for more people to come to Japan. And it's made it so that people who might not normally be able to travel are able to travel now. So we talk about tourism fatigue. And what's the effect on the expat? And of course I live in Tokyo, so when I talk about Japan, I usually mean Tokyo. But the effect it's had on the expat is, since Japanese tend to categorize things, a person who looks like me, a middle-aged white guy, they see another guy my age and they just assume that we're exactly the same. Where I come from back in the States, you're treated as an individual for the most part. In Japan, you're treated as you are exactly the same as that person who, looks kind of like you. So Japanese cannot tell the difference between a long-term expat who's been here 20, 30 years or somebody who just stepped off the airplane. And I made it confusing for some people the other day. It was my birthday, and went out to dinner with a Japanese person and who was actually on their way to go out of town, had a suitcase and a lot of stuff to carry. I said, let me carry the suitcase for you. So I did that, and then we go into a restaurant. It's my birthday, so of course, you know, dinner's on them. And I didn't expect that, but it was nice. And of course, you know, when you're carrying a suitcase, you're with a Japanese person who speaks fluent English, and they pay for dinner. Well, the staff automatically assumes that, you know, this person's got to be a tourist. So when I said, like, oh, I live here and live here in town, and they're like, it doesn't compute. So that's fine. But Japanese can't tell the difference between a long-term expat and a tourist. And when I say expat, there are actually two types of expats. Now, legally the term means a person who's living in a country where they were not born. So I'm living in Japan. I was not born in Japan. That makes me an expat. I could be an English teacher or an engineer or work as a lawyer like I do, and I'm technically an expat. There are the other types of expats who live in buildings like this, and they have really good jobs. Somebody who's maybe accomplished quite a lot in their career gets sent to Japan to head up the Japanese office. That means they get to live in a really nice residence, maybe get a car, maybe get a membership to the American Club, and a lot of prestige and a title. So when people say expat, especially when they talk about foreigners living in Japan, there are two types of expats. And if you get the expat package, you're a person who's got a really super good job. So just be aware of that. But I'm going to walk through Roppongi. It's going to be a little bit loud, and that's okay. Because part of this walk and talk thing is you get to see a little bit of Tokyo. Here's a cement mixer driving past me. I'm in, like I said, Azabudai Hills, or I was in Azabudai Hills, walking toward Roppongi right now. And Japan, specifically Tokyo, is a place that will never be finished. There's constant construction. And really cool because they put these little signs. I'll see if I can find one in my library of clip art that I've taken over the years. They put these little signs on these buildings when they're doing construction. They'll tell you how many, you know, decibels you're hearing. They'll tell you the plans for the building, how big is it, who's in charge of construction, and the what do they call it? Not the ETA, but the date they expect to finish it, expected completion date, all that stuff. Japanese love data. But what this effect has had on foreigners living overseas, especially in Asia, so we've seen these nuisance streamers who come around and cause trouble, and they think they're funny, and they're really not. They're just a danger to themselves and everybody around them. So kind of came to my attention when a guy who goes by Johnny Somali, his name is actually Ramzi Khalid Ismail, but Legal Mindset is covering that, and he's got some really good live streams and some really good wrap-ups on what's going on with Ramzi. So go to his channel and see what's going on there. I was going to cover some of that, but you know, I like to cover Japanese culture more than I want to cover these nuisance streamers. And that, to me, that's got a short shelf life. I think Andrew does a great job with it, and he's got a great, he's going to have a great career as a streamer and lawyer. So keep going. But some of these guys come over to Japan, cause trouble. There was a kid with a big Bluetooth speaker who would do backflips on the subway, and people didn't really seem to mind him that much. But my buddy Young James on his channel, I've done a video with him, and I'll make sure to put a link in the description, but James had a great explanation of that. Just because people don't confront you doesn't mean it's okay. Japanese are very non-confrontational, and I think that's why these people come and prey on countries that are filled with nice, non-confrontational people, like Japan. But the effect this has is, since Japanese can't tell the difference between a tourist and a local who's here obeying the laws and trying to fit in as much as possible. I mean, with this face, I'll never really fit in, but somebody who's trying to just make a life in a country like Japan, and then you have some joker who comes over and causes a lot of trouble, it makes our lives difficult. Because when I walk around with this camera, I was doing this with Paul the other day, and when you have a camera out, people think you're a streamer, and I'm not. But I haven't actually mastered the live stream technology yet. Maybe I will someday. Tell me in the comments below if you'd watch a live stream from Tokyo. So I have had people, so the camera's facing me, but the people who look at me, they don't know that. So I've had actually people like run out of the way when I walk towards them with this they think I'm going to run up on them and, you know, try to do some awkward street interview or something. And that's not my intention at all. I'm just catching, you know, me and Tokyo in the background. But I've seen these guys, and Young James talks about this. These guys, I had to learn this word, riz. I think that means to hit on somebody or to try to be a pickup artist. But these guys who try to riz on Japanese girls, I'm using it like I know what I'm talking about. But that's really super annoying. Also, Japanese, non-confrontational, and they won't just tell you no. They might actually give you their Instagram and then just block you as soon as you walk away. So just because you got somebody's Instagram doesn't mean you're successful. And if you use a word like riz, already you're not successful. But Japanese people are, you know, getting tourist fatigue. How does that manifest in the life of an expat who's just trying to fit in and make a life here in Japan? So a lot of people, I don't expect people, you know, who are coming here for a week vacation or for a 3-4 day vacation to learn fluent Japanese. But since a lot of these people go into a convenience store or a restaurant and don't speak Japanese, like I said, I don't expect that. But since the service workers have had to use a lot of English, and they see a foreign person come in, they're like, oh no, this person doesn't speak Japanese. And they've learned a couple phrases of English, and they just expect that we don't know how to, you know, do daily things in Japan. So a lot of stores, convenience stores, they have these little kiosks where you can do the self-checkout thing. And first I kind of didn't like those. I kind of resisted that. Now I don't, and I've told you several reasons why, because sometimes the communication with the staff at a convenience store is just awkward, and it made me doubt my Japanese a couple times. And one reason is that they just assume that I don't speak Japanese, and so when I speak to them in Japanese, they get puzzled, and their brain just kind of breaks for a second. They don't know what to think about it. So I had this happen the other day. I was at the gym, and one of the women in the gym is an Instagrammer. And I told her, like, oh, I saw your post from Tuesday. I told her in Japanese, I saw your post from Tuesday. That was really cool. You're going to have a big following. She already has a big following, but she looked at me and said, what? And the first time we spoke in English. So she didn't know that I speak Japanese. And I don't just introduce people and say, hey, I speak fluent Japanese and I can read Japanese. So I didn't just introduce myself like that. So maybe she just assumed that I didn't speak any Japanese, because the first time we spoke after class, she spoke English and I just replied in English. But I told her in Japanese, like, hey, I saw your post from Tuesday. That was really cool. She's like, what? And I said, Tuesday, your post. Huh? So I said again, Tuesday. I saw your post from Tuesday, from class. I was at the same class as you. She's like, she kept saying, what? And so finally I just said in English, I said, Tuesday. And she was like, oh, Tuesday, what happened on Tuesday? I said, I saw your post from Tuesday. It was really cool. I told her in English this time. She said, oh. And then I thought, because she doesn't really, not every Japanese person looks the same, right? If you don't know a lot of Japanese people, haven't had a lot of contact with Japanese people, there's a tendency to think they all look the same. Well, they look different from me, which I guess means they all look the same. Anyway, they don't, especially if you've been here a long time. But I thought, oh no, maybe she's not Japanese. Her post was in Japanese. She understood all the instructions in class in Japanese. Maybe she's Chinese, maybe she's Korean. And I said, oh, you don't speak Japanese? And she goes, no, I'm Japanese. I said, oh, I was speaking Japanese. She said, you were? I said, yeah. And so I said it again. I said, Kaiyomi no toko mimashita kedo. She's like, oh my gosh. She was just so completely shocked that I was speaking to her in Japanese. She didn't expect it, and maybe even couldn't hear it. Maybe it sounded like English to her. And so that's one thing that happens is people just assume somebody looks like me, just, it's impossible for this person to speak Japanese. So when I speak to them in Japanese, they might even think they're hearing English, but it doesn't sound like English, and so they're like, I don't know what you're saying. And it's really easy to lose your confidence in your Japanese when you've been here 20 years and you've given presentations in front of hundreds of people in Japanese, and you try to say something very simple to a person, and they look at you and say, huh? So that's one thing that happens is Japanese tend to put everybody in one category. You look like this, you don't speak Japanese. And so I go into a convenience store, they just assume I'm a tourist, and they've got a kiosk where you can do the self-checkout thing. I've actually had convenience store workers come up and just, not physically, but just kind of like aggressively push me out of the way and just start pushing the buttons for me and say, you know, and then instead of saying like, you know, genki ni shimasu ka, credit ni shimasu ka, they say cash, credit, like, yeah, credit ni shimasu, and, or genki ni shimasu, whatever. And they kind of look at me like, huh, what? It's very confusing for them. It's not confusing for me at all, but very confusing for them. So I've had people kind of either reach around the counter and just start pushing buttons on the self-check kiosk for me, and they think they're helping me, and actually they're just annoying me. But it's only started happening recently. It's happened 2 or 3 times in the last week. And by the way, I said I started using those because the cashiers sometimes go into cognitive dissonance when they hear me speak Japanese. So I started using those self-checkouts because when I say I don't need a bag, I have my own shopping bag, sometimes the cashier will look at me and say, 2 bags? I'm like, that's not what I said. So I just, you know, I'm in a hurry, I get annoyed, so I just went to the self-checkout. And then I start going to the self-checkout, and this has actually happened, like I said, 3 times in the last week. It's even happened on the bullet train, where somebody looks at me and says, oh no, he can't possibly know what he's doing on the machine. So I've had people who work for the bullet train just come over and start pushing buttons for me and asking like, where you go, and you know, things like that in simpler broken English. And I answer them in Japanese and they look at me like, so this tourism fatigue is actually grinding my gears, probably just as much as the Japanese people, because as Paul and I discussed on our walk and talk the other day, we're so spoiled by this extreme politeness. And when I first came here, I kind of got tired of that too. People are so extremely polite. They're so afraid to say no. Like, do you have this product in your store? They'd be like, ah, chotto. And then they, you know, kind of pretend to go and look in the back. And then they come back and they say, we might not have it. And let me see. And I think in the back of their mind, they probably know they don't have it, but they don't want to be rude. So, and just say flat out no. So they would do this, you know, kind of thing like, oh, let me check, let me find out. And oh, you know, if you go to our store at the other location, you can get it. Should I call them for you? And now, if you go into a store and ask for something they don't have, they'll just flat out just tell you no. And that's it. They just don't have time for it. They're over it. So there's been a massive change in the level of service in Japan. So if you work in the service industry and you speak English, you may be shocked to find out that some of your customers are expats or long-term residents of Japan. If you're Japanese and you speak English, tell me in the comments below. Has this tourism fatigue, has it changed how you feel about, you know, the foreigners that you take care of in your business? I'm curious. And if you're an expat in Japan, let me know. Has your experience changed over the last year or two since the floodgates started opening up again and they started accepting more tourists? So I'm really curious because I don't want to think that this is everybody's experience. It could be just mine. And I live in an area, it's kind of like Washington, D.C., where there are embassies everywhere, foreign companies everywhere, so you get a lot of people come in for a short time who either don't have the energy or the time, sometimes the aptitude, but sometimes they just, you know, don't learn enough Japanese for daily life, and that's okay. Not everybody can. Not everybody's a nerd like me who, out of ego, spends 10 hours a day studying a foreign language just to prove to everybody how smart they are, you know. So that's how that goes. But what have you noticed? Any changes? Then, what about people around you? So when you get on the train, have you noticed, do people treat you differently? Do people treat you differently? Do they treat you like you're a tourist, even though you've been here a long time? Like I said, they can't tell the difference. Andrew Esquire says this on his Legal Mindset channel all the time. The expat who's living in a foreign country just trying to get along, trying to follow the rules, or the tourist who just got out of the airplane, they can't tell the difference. because to them we all look the same, and that's okay. But tell me your experience. I'm very interested in that. So a couple reasons why this happens. Why do Japanese think that foreigners don't or can't or won't learn Japanese? And some of this comes down to the media, some of it comes down to experience. Like I said, I'm in the kind of like Washington, D.C., where if you go into this place back here, it's called Nissin, really nice supermarket. They have foreign staff. And when you go in, a lot of these places, if they have the designated English speaker, they have like a little British flag on their name tag or something to show that they speak English. They have the designated English speaker, and I don't always go directly to them. I'll go to the shortest line. And sometimes the Japanese staff who don't speak English, they think, okay, here comes an English speaker. I don't speak good enough English. Why don't they go to John over there who speaks English? Or Kenji over there who has a little thing on his name tag so he speaks English. Why don't you go to him? So what they'll do is they'll pretend to be busy until the person with the designated English speaker thing on their name tag frees up, and then they'll direct you over to that person. It's almost like a conspiracy, like I'm going to make sure you don't learn Japanese, and that's not really happening. It's just that they're not confident in their ability, so they'd rather pass that off to somebody, offload it to somebody who can handle it, even if you don't need it. But the idea of the bumbling foreigner, you'll see this on TV all the time. So I've had a couple opportunities to be on Japanese TV, not in a big, not in a big part, but I had my 15 Seconds of Fame a couple weeks ago, and it was a thing where I had to learn a skill from a Japanese person, and it's pretty simple. It was just drawing a sword. It was iaido, which is Japanese art of swordsmanship. So I was supposed to learn this, and they were going to teach me how to do it. And after a couple of takes, and he was a really good teacher too, really cool dude. So after a couple of takes, I had learned what to do, and of course it takes years to master. So I don't have any delusions of having mastered this skill, but after a couple of takes, it started to look like I knew what I was doing. And so the camera staff just kind of looked at each other like, oh no, what do we do now? And they go over and whisper something to him, and he comes over to me and he goes, "You're doing too well." I was like, what? He said, yeah. He said, got to make it look like you're just learning. Like you can't do it too well, or otherwise, like, it's not going to look right. So for Japanese TV, what they want is the bumbling foreigner. And so we changed it up a little bit to a skill I didn't have, to where I looked like I didn't know what I was doing. And oh, by the way, here's one of those signs of the expected completion date and all that stuff. Right there you go. How many square meters, all that stuff. And sorry about the noise. We're going to walk past a construction site, but my sensei, who was teaching me how to draw a sword, was explaining, like, you're doing too well. They don't want anybody who knows what they're doing. I was like, oh boy. So, like I said, we changed it up a little bit, did a couple things I didn't know how to do, and a couple of times I looked at him and I said, you mean like this? And that's the take that ends up on TV. There's also a TV show where they go around and interview foreigners who've just come off the airplane. I've seen them at Narita Airport a couple times, and I think it's set up where they've maybe contacted somebody ahead of time who's coming to Japan for the first time, and they take them to have ramen, take them to a hot spring or something, and then they, of course, it's their first time, they get free food and a free hotel, and they're like, well, I love Japan, and that's what gets on TV. And then they pick somebody who doesn't know how to use chopsticks because it's such a special skill. And the Japanese people love to see this because they've got this idea that their culture is so unique. And it is unique, it's special. But they've got this thing in the back of their mind all the time that it's just too difficult for somebody who wasn't born and raised in Japan to do anything like use chopsticks. So they love to show the bumbling foreigner. And then if you learn a couple Japanese words, and this is what's really confusing for people when they first move here, is they start to think, and I did this too, so they start to think that their Japanese is amazing because you speak a couple words in Japanese and people start clapping hands like, oh my gosh, you're so amazing, Jozu. And all you did was say something like, sushi, ski. Yeah, I like sushi. And it's really not that, just a couple words. But the people would just lose their minds, like, oh my gosh, you're so amazing. But if you say something a little more difficult, like, hey, I saw your Instagram post from Tuesday from class, and it was really cool. You start to lose that novelty as a foreigner, become too Japanese. And at one point that was my goal, was to try to be more Japanese. Now it's not really my goal. I'm just trying to be myself as a person who lives in Japan. But if you lose your foreignness, you lose your novelty, you kind of lose your value, because they want to see this person who's lost and kind of bumbling and doesn't really speak Japanese, doesn't know where they're going. This is why when somebody comes over their first time, especially if you're just out of college, get your first job over in Japan, get here maybe after a month or two they're dating somebody, and within a year or two they're married, and then seems to they start to think like, wow, it was so easy to meet somebody. And you'll see a lot of this on social media, where people will post their W's but not their L's. So for every W you see, every win you see, somebody who came over here and met somebody immediately, there's probably 100 people who didn't have the same experience. So you're only seeing the positive side, the rosy side. So don't think that just coming to Japan, you're just gonna, land in a great relationship. Of course, there are great people here, so yeah, you might. But some guys, I've known a couple who were in a relationship for a while. They learned to speak pretty good Japanese. They learn their way around. They know how to take the subway. They can distinguish the different coins, right? It's really not that hard. But they're on the dating market again, and they find out it gets really hard once you lose your foreignness, once you speak Japanese too well. One of my friends went on a date with a woman he really liked, and she said, like, yeah, I like you, but you're not foreign enough. You're too similar to a Japanese person. And so she put him in the friend zone. And I guess that's the way it goes, right? But if you lose your foreignness, you kind of lose your novelty. And Japanese don't think that's as cool. So why do Japanese do this? Now, this is just me, and I want to hear your experience. Like I said, I talked about these TV shows that show the bumbling foreigner who, is lost, can't use chopsticks, can't speak Japanese. Well, they do this on Japanese TV with each other. There's a great show called Hajimete no Otsukai, and it's a little child, I want to say 4 or 5 years old, who goes on their first errand for their parents. The parents will, the show starts out with little kid, Kenji, or, whatever. And the parents are telling him, okay, go to the store, get a carton of eggs. And they give him some money. And you see the little kid crossing the street by themselves. Japanese kids are so cute, because when they cross the road, they raise their hands. Sometimes their hand only comes up to the side of their head, but they still do it. It's really cute. And then they wear these yellow hats a lot of the time. And so the cars can see them. Because they only come up to the hood of the car. But really cute show. And but this kid is going on their first errand. They're lost. Maybe they've been to the store with their parents before. Maybe they've seen them buy groceries before, but they've never done it themselves, and it's very awkward. It seems as if the fans on TV love to see somebody in an awkward situation. This comes back to the foreigner who can't use chopsticks and can't speak Japanese. They love to see them in awkward positions. And they love to see these little kids getting these situations where they don't know what they're doing. This even gets more sinister when it gets to those videos with the pixels in them. You know what I mean? The most popular are the ones that have the word debut in their title. That means the first time on film. And it's always very awkward. And I think the Japanese fans love that awkwardness. And I don't really get it. But it's just something that seems to be very popular, is to watch people in awkward situations. And even on the game shows, you'll see these people jumping into vats of beans, or just whipped cream or something, or or wrapping themselves in Velcro, jumping on a wall, trying to see how high they can jump up and stay. So the sense of humor is very different. And like I said, I think they love to see people in awkward situations. And that's a very foreign mindset for people like me. So, but that happens. And so I think that's why they like to see foreigners in awkward situations where, they may not be able to speak Japanese, can't use chopsticks, etc. And I think, though, that plays into this idea that, foreigners just don't speak Japanese. So when they've seen this show with a foreigner who can't speak Japanese, and I come into the store, they're like, oh, that person is just like the one I just saw on TV. I'm going to have to coddle them. And if you break that narrative, if you're too Japanese, if you just pull out your chopsticks and start eating, if you answer in Japanese, you break the narrative. And I think they just don't like that. It's just too uncomfortable. Because, TV is a great brainwashing tool, and whether it's intentional or not, but TV is a great brainwashing tool. And when people hear something that doesn't go with their brainwashing, they go into cognitive dissonance and they don't like it. And they reject it. You could show them the truth and they would still reject it. So that happens. Now, like I said, how this affects the foreigner who's just trying to live his life in Japan. You go into a convenience store and the cashier treats you like you're a tourist. They expect the awkward foreigner. They expect the person who doesn't speak Japanese. They expect the person who doesn't know how to use chopsticks. And so all this discussion, I think, really what it's telling me is maybe it's time for me to take a vacation, right? Maybe I deserve a vacation. Maybe I just need a vacation. So what do you think? What's been your experience? If you have visited Japan, let's say you visited in the 90s or the aughts or the 2010s, and then you came back in 2024, 2025, did you have a different experience? If you lived here a long time. I lived here through the whole 90s, and I came back in 2014. And so I've had two different experiences of Japan. If you're Japanese and you speak English, what's been your experience? I want to know. Tell me what you think. I want to hear from you as well. But what's the solution? Frankly, I don't know. I think Japan will adjust to being a tourist destination. But I think also the exchange rate will change. If it goes back to where the exchange rate was in 1994, 100 yen to the dollar, it won't be as easy to travel to Japan. You won't have these jokers coming over, and they won't be treating Japan like it's not a serious place. If you come to Japan, be respectful, treat people like people, don't do anything that you wouldn't want to see shown in court. I think our buddy Ramsey has learned that lesson. Maybe not. Maybe he still thinks it's a joke. But I've always tried to be a good representative of my home country. And sometimes fall short of that, but I always think of, try to be the best example you can. So when somebody meets another American, another middle-aged white guy here in Japan, they might remember me and think, oh yeah, those people are cool. When you come to a place like Japan, be that person. And you don't have to speak fluent Japanese. You might even think it's cool to be the awkward foreigner, because it is so different that, your first time you are going to be that awkward foreigner. Maybe you don't speak Japanese, maybe you can't use chopsticks. And so I'm not saying you have to. For me, it made my life easier because I plan to stay here long term. But by all means, just come as you are. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to nail it. That first business meeting, you don't have to do everything perfect. People are pretty forgiving, and that's one thing I love about Japan is people can be pretty forgiving. So, but it's not a good thing to take advantage of that. So being a long-term resident of Japan, you don't want to get into the trap that, well, people will forgive me if I mess up. Always do your best. Always try to be the best example of that foreigner. And don't rely too much on the good graces of people, because they might get tired of that. Now, Japanese people are very nice until they're not. So we may see someday where they just say, like, okay, we're not going to put up with this anymore. And there might be a new law, or people just might, like I said, the cashiers these days, and they're not everybody. I've met with plenty of Japanese business people, and they've always been very pleasant. They're not in service jobs, so they don't have to worry so much about, clueless foreigners coming in and not knowing how to use a self-checkout. But yeah, the regular people are doing great. I think it's the service workers are having a hard time, so be extra nice to them. They have a very hard job. But by all means, come to Japan. Have a great time. Just be respectful. Like I said, don't have to speak perfect Japanese, don't have to have all the skills of chopsticks and things like that. And don't be afraid to ask questions. People are very helpful as long as you show you're trying, right? So, in summary, be a good person. Cheers.